I pushed open the hospital room door to find Alex leaning against the head of the bed, staring out the window. Hearing the noise, he turned his head, his eyes were unfamiliar and distant. My husband had lost his memory in the car accident, and he had forgotten only me. "Who are you?" he asked, frowning. I gripped the strap of my bag and forced myself to finish my self-introduction. Throughout the entire visit he was polite, as if dealing with a stranger. As I stepped out of the ward, his excited voice suddenly came from behind. "Doctor. I think I'm in love. That girl just now, I fell for her at first sight. If only I could marry her." Standing outside the door, I looked down at the wedding ring on my ring finger and for a moment didn't know whether I should go back in and tell him. "Your dream came true long ago." The hospital's acrid disinfectant smell churned my stomach. When I got the call saying Alex had been in an accident, I rushed out without even putting on my coat. Pushing open the ward door, he was laughing and chatting with his friend Liam, looking hardly hurt at all. The knot in my chest finally loosened, and I hurried to the bedside, my voice trembling. "You scared me to death." Alex looked up, his eyes full of unfamiliarity. "Who are you?" I froze where I stood, thinking he was joking. "Don't be ridiculous, that kind of joke isn't funny at all." He reached out to take my hand. He jerked back sharply, like someone who'd run into a molester. "Miss, do we know each other?" My heart suddenly fell to the bottom of a valley. After 3 years of marriage, I know his lying face too well. This time he really doesn't remember me. Tears streamed down uncontrollably. Alex reflexively reached out to wipe them away, then froze midair, staring at his hand in confusion. I turned to Liam, my voice choking. "What did the doctor say?" He looked up at me and explained. "The doctor said there's still some bruising on his brain, he might forget some things." "This isn't just forgetting a few things. It's complete amnesia about me." The look in Alex's eyes was full of unfamiliarity, and a sharp ache rose in my chest. "I'm going to ask the doctor." I practically fled. After leaving the ward, I leaned against the door to steady myself. Just as I was about to go, Alex's voice, tinged with excitement, came from inside. "I'm done for, I've fallen in love. I had love at first sight with that girl just now. I can't imagine how happy I'd be if she were my wife." Me, who had already become his wife. The sadness inside me vanished without a trace. Casper in the hospital room froze for a few seconds when he heard that, then stifling a smile said, "You want to pursue her? Isn't that allowed? Do you know her?" Casper had no intention of telling him the truth. He said, with a very teasing tone, "I know her." "You know her too?" "Really?" Alex, upon hearing this, got so excited he raised his voice. "No wonder she came running as soon as I had the accident." "Are we close?" "You too?" "The relationship is a bit complicated, huh?" "How complicated?" "You two are living together." Alex looked as if struck by lightning. "Living together?" "As the other person involved, I." Casper, taking advantage of Alex's amnesia, was leading him on until he was practically crippled. Alex was still questioning his life. "Why are we living together? Am I some kind of coerced love interest?" Casper finally couldn't help laughing out loud. Confirmed, this was a true brother. Alex had liked me first, but for reasons unknown, perhaps he believed some slander, he didn't openly pursue me. Instead, he sneaked around, trying to fish me in. I took the bait. There was no resisting. His 8-pack abs, hound-like waist, and impossibly sculpted face, it was really hard not to be moved. Thinking of that, I abandoned the idea of pushing the door open and telling him the truth. Heaven's way is cyclical. It's time for him to properly chase me once. This time I must make him confess first. The doctor told me Alex's condition wasn't too serious, a few months' rest should see him right. After leaving the consultation room I went straight home. I put away the wedding photos and moved all my toiletries from the master bedroom into the spare room. After making sure there'd be no slip-ups, I headed back to the hospital. When Alex saw me again, he was nothing like his previous aloof self. He looked at me and, using the lowest voice he could muster, asked, I heard the two of us are living together? Casper was standing nearby trying so hard not to laugh he was about to hurt himself. I stifled a smile and, with a straight face, said, more precisely, it's called renting together. Renting together? Alex looked utterly incredulous. You and me? Yes. You invested and lost everything, spent your savings, have no income, and only have one house left with a mortgage still unpaid, so you have no choice but to share the rent with someone to keep yourself afloat. I wasn't wrong. Because that was exactly the phrasing Alex had come up with back when he wanted to live with me. And of course I had believed it. Alex paused for a few seconds, unable to believe it, and looked at Casper. Casper hurriedly wiped the smile from his face, reached out and patted his shoulder, and sighed. Bro, it's true. You are pretty broke right now. Last month you even had to borrow money from me to pay your mortgage. Casper, that guy, really just opens his mouth and lies without so much as a draft. I'm a pauper now? Alex quietly closed his eyes, looking somewhat utterly despondent. I can understand. After all, anyone who suddenly realizes they've not only lost 3 years of memory but gone from a second-generation rich kid to a negative second generation would be shattered. He looked at me, a little embarrassed to say it aloud. You mean I'm now completely relying on you to make money and support me? He looked so endearing right then. If he weren't still acting, I would have definitely kissed him already. I suppressed the untimely impulse, making my tone as detached as possible. You can't put it that way. We're just landlord and tenant. Maybe our relationship was too simple. Alex sounded a little disappointed. Casper's eyes met mine, and I understood his meaning in an instant. This little act was amusing. He wanted to keep playing it out. He pretended we weren't close, his tone as tactful as possible. Sister-in-law. Miss Ivy, since Alex had a car accident he's not very convenient, could I trouble you to look after him for a month or two? Just give him a meal now and then, consider it payment for a few months' rent. When Alex heard him, his eyes immediately lit up. He looked as if to say, why didn't I think of that? Truly my good brother. I didn't speak, I looked a little troubled. Alex looked up at me and, careful, asked, is that okay? TSK. It was that innocent, harmless face that first reeled me in. I hadn't expected that after all these years he'd still be using the same trick. I gave him a smile. All right then. Alex stayed in the hospital for a few days and then went home. To make the performance feel more authentic, I moved into the spare bedroom and secretly changed his contact name on his phone to mine. But I have to say, habits really are a frightening thing. Without Alex holding me, I rarely had insomnia, but tonight I couldn't sleep. Scrolling my phone did nothing to soothe me. If anything, it made me more restless. Until I opened a post on a forum and saw a familiar account. It was Alex. I knew his account, he usually used it to answer technical questions, but half an hour ago he had posted an oddly out-of-character question. Fell in love at first sight with my roommate, how can I win her over? The replies below were all over the place. If you're living right next door and still haven't won her over, all I can say is, buddy, you've got some work to do. If you've got money, throw it around. If you've got a great body, use it to seduce. If you can cook, win her over through her stomach. If you've got nothing, just keep dreaming. Just go for it, man. If you're a real man, just go for it. Perhaps finding these methods impractical, Alex added another piece of information. I forgot to mention, I don't have a job. I'm her landlord and roommate, and I'm currently living off her rent. The moment he sent that line, it drew a barrage of condemnations in the comments. Keep dreaming. I seriously suspect the poster is trying to scare girls into paying higher rent. Bro, your immediate priority should be finding a job, not chasing girls. From what I know of Alex, those comments would probably only make him more determined. After all, it was that kind of stubbornness that got him to successfully reel me in. I decided to tease him. I flipped to the bottom and left a comment, are you sure your roommate from the shared apartment doesn't have a partner? That comment had barely gone out a few minutes when I got a message from Alex. Are you asleep? Not yet. Um, I have a question I want to ask you. What's the problem? Do you have a boyfriend? I saw the message and couldn't help but laugh softly. No. I could hear Alex's excited voice even through the door. I curled my lips and kept typing. But I'm married. Maybe I'd teased him too harshly. 10 minutes passed and Alex still hadn't replied. He wouldn't just give up like that, would he? I got up to go clear things up with him. I opened the door and found us staring at each other. He looked flustered, a little wronged, hesitated, and finally, unwilling to let it go, asked, "You really got married?" I didn't say anything, just sighed. Seeing me on the verge of speaking but holding back, Alex's hope died completely. His eyes were full of bitterness. I softened. There was nothing I could do. He looked at me with that face that completely matched my aesthetic, and it was really hard not to soften. "All right, actually I lied to you." Alex's expression instantly brightened. If he had a tail, it would probably have been wagging by then. I continued, exasperated. People keep bothering me under the pretense of pursuing me, so I had to say I'm married and live with my husband. If it bothers you that much, I'll move out tomorrow. I lowered my head slowly, trying to look as pitiful as possible. Not at all. Of course not. Alex immediately assured me, as if he were afraid I'd start packing my bags right then. Really? I smiled at him and softened my voice. Alex, you're so nice. The tips of his ears flushed red in an instant, and he became a little incoherent. I'm actually okay, not especially great. Possibly realizing he'd been a bit out of line, Alex said stiffly, "I'll go back to my room and sleep, good night." Good night. He retreated with the same awkwardness. The first thing Alex did when he got back to his room was reply to my comment. She doesn't have a boyfriend. And she's out there calling me her husband. It's fake now, but sooner or later it'll become real. After all, I have the strength and the means. His grandiose boasts successfully drew a large crowd of wingmen offering him advice. One called "My brother isn't very smart" caught Alex's attention. Bro. Trust me, pull out your biggest asset and use it to seduce her hard. For example? Abs? If you have them, you have to make every effort to let them appear and disappear before her eyes. Remember, that hint of revealing, hint of covering is more enticing. I strongly suspect it was the same man who planted the idea in Alex 3 years ago. God knows the moment I first saw his abs I understood clearly that our roommate arrangement was about to change. 3 years have passed. I'm no longer the greedy girl I once was. A few abs, how could they possibly hook me? But he really did hook me. Damn it, how could I fall for the same abs twice? I watched Alex step out of his room with ridiculous affectation, pretending nonchalance as he wrapped a towel around himself. My face betrayed me and flushed bright red. What's going on? How is it that after watching for 3 years I still never get tired of it? I cleared my throat and, trying to cover my agitation, turned my head. The waves raged in my chest, my face remained composed and calm. Why don't you put on some clothes? Alex, striking a pose, huh? I told him solemnly, the flu is really bad right now. If you stay like that you'll easily get sick, and if you get sick you might pass it on to me. If I take time off I won't make money and then I won't be able to pay the rent. Alex listened, stunned. I expected him to be upset, but instead he grinned big and foolishly. Got it, I'll go put on some clothes right now. Something was off, very off. I thought it over and still couldn't figure out why he'd reacted that way. Alex moved quickly, slipped on his clothes, and sat across from me. He kept holding his phone and kept sneaking glances at me. I felt puzzled and pretended to scroll through my phone. Then I noticed his latest comment under that post, "My brother isn't very smart." Bro. It really works. She started caring about me on her own, worrying I'd get sick, even worried that if she got infected she couldn't pay the rent and we couldn't live together. Don't you think that means she kind of likes me? I, who completely misread the situation. Married for 2 years, I still felt insecure because I often couldn't keep up with Alex's train of thought. Is there such a thing as self-seducing yourself? May I ask? Not only was I speechless, my brother isn't very smart, was speechless too. She had no other reaction? Like blushing, shortness of breath, not daring to look. No, but she cared about me. She might have been more concerned about whether she had somewhere to live. Wrong, she was obviously concerned about whether she could live with me. Forget it, let's not worry about that for now. Try something else, I'll teach you a trick. Act vulnerable, preferably like a childhood trauma, make her pity you deeply. Pity is the beginning of love. But my childhood was wonderful. There's a rhetorical device called exaggeration. I get it. Bro. You're awesome. I felt a bad premonition the moment I read that sentence. No way, not again, the same story I've heard who knows how many times. I glanced at Alex sitting across from me. Our eyes met and he immediately looked away, as if afraid anyone might guess he was up to something. After dinner, I was about to take a shower when Alex's phone suddenly rang. He glanced at me and answered. I recognized the voice on the other end, his cousin. Alex replied perfunctorily to the other end, I'm fine, it's just a minor scrape. Don't worry about me, I have someone taking care of me. Why don't you believe me? I'll hand the phone to her now. After saying that, he came over and handed me the phone, whispering in plea, do me a favor, I don't want my family to worry. I hesitated for a few seconds and took the phone. My cousin's voice came on the line. Sister-in-law. I didn't slip up. My brother just messaged me saying he wants to chase after you and asked me to call him. Are you two doing cosplay? I have to say, cousin's brain since the amnesia has only gotten smaller, not bigger. Alex's cousin already knew about his amnesia and had agreed to help me play along. I stifled a laugh, met Alex's eyes, and effectively said, no need to thank me, after all, he's my roommate. My cousin praised my acting a few times and hung up. Alex took the phone and sighed deeply, looking very troubled. I ignored him. He sighed again. I found it amusing but put on a worried expression and looked at him, what's wrong? Alex finally seized the chance, his voice extremely low, when I think of my cousin, I remember something that happened to me in first grade. Here we go again. Even though I've heard this story no fewer than 800 times, I still pretend I know nothing. What happened? Alex, seeing me take the bait, almost couldn't suppress the upward tug at his mouth. It's not a big deal. When my cousin was born, I wanted to go see her, but my parents ganged up on me, said I was just a kid sticking my nose into things. The more he talked, the sadder he became, in the end he looked down, as if he'd been abandoned. I remember the first time I heard this story, I had already started to feel a little fond of Alex. He split open that childhood wound and laid it before me, it was hard for me not to be moved. For a long time after that I felt a deep tenderness for him. It wasn't until after we were married that I, by hints and half-questions, asked Alex's mother about the matter. Only then did I learn he was beaten back then because the teacher had asked everyone to bring their favorite thing to school. He, sneaking about, had brought his cousin who was only a few months old. The parents went crazy. The teacher was stunned. The classmates were dumbfounded. He sat there, smug as can be. When his cousin heard she was to act with Alex, she agreed without hesitation. I have every reason to suspect she was settling a score from back then. After Alex finished speaking, he sneakily glanced up to gauge my reaction. Now that I knew the truth, I felt a pang of sympathy for my past, foolishly trusting self. Under Alex's expectant look, I replied very coldly, you hit it too lightly. It's all over, huh? Alex's sad expression froze on his face. Too lightly? Yeah. Think about it, your cousin was just born, and you're just a kid, clumsy and careless, what if you bumped her? And hospitals are crowded and chaotic, what if you weren't paying attention and lost her? Alex wasn't sad anymore, only stunned. So does that mean I shouldn't blame my parents for this? Obviously. Who wouldn't get a beating for sneaking a cousin into school? I finished my shower and came out. Alex had gone to look for "my brother isn't very bright" again. They didn't use private messages and instead chatted in the comments, and besides me there were a lot of people waiting to see what would happen next. Bro. Thank you so much. After she heard about my childhood trauma, she smoothed things over between me and my parents. She must kind of like me. My buddy isn't very bright, clearly not believing what he'd said, asked for some details. After asking, he shut down. Do you think she felt sorry for you? Of course she did. She was even afraid I'd lose my stuff in the hospital. Isn't that caring? If you say you feel heartache, then feel it. Brother, this is the last move, we'll definitely win this round. As the saying goes, a man should be a little drunk, act until you cry. Pretending to be drunk is definitely the best way to heat up feelings. But I don't drink. I'm not telling you to actually drink, just have the smell of alcohol on you. I understand. I got it too. So Alex had been pretending to be drunk back then. No wonder in 3 years I'd only ever seen him drink that one time. I sat on the bed and laughed at myself until it hurt. How could someone with amnesia use the same old seduction routine? About an hour later, there was the sound of something heavy hitting the floor outside the door. Here we go. Our Oscar-winning Alex had begun his performance. Just thinking about going downstairs to spar with him made me want to laugh. Alex was still out there persistently making noise. I braced myself and pushed the door open, only to see a dark shape in the living room suddenly collapse to the floor. Immediately after came the clink of bottles and glasses. I walked to Alex's side by the moonlight spilling into the living room. On the floor sat the 1982 Lafite I had someone buy for me. This scene had cost a fortune. I winced for a few seconds, then slowly moved closer to Alex. He reeked of strong alcohol, his shirt unbuttoned in places. His collarbones were clearly visible. I swallowed reflexively. Damn. I'd been hooked by his looks again. Alex looked at me, his consciousness fuzzy, and smiled weakly, swaying as he slurred, I was the one who misunderstood them. This them was probably his father and mother. I hadn't expected him to pick up that act and run with it. Years later, suddenly realizing you'd misunderstood your parents and feeling remorseful, so you drown your sorrows in drink. The plot couldn't be more predictable. I have to admit, though, he had a knack for this, otherwise I wouldn't have been so foolishly taken in. I reached out to steady his collapsing body, a little reproachful. How can you drink? You only recently had your accident, you really don't take care of yourself. Alex protested silently, I didn't actually drink that much. Didn't drink that much? This whole bottle is empty. How is that not much? Alex looked at me, a little annoyed, and smiled at me, you're worried about me. I almost reflexively blurted out, of course I'm worried, after all, you're my old what? Boss. Alex looked a little disappointed, muttering, but I don't want to be your boss. I raised an eyebrow. Then what do you want to be to me? In the moonlight, I could only see his eyes. Clear and earnest. 3 years ago when he pretended to be drunk he had the same look, back then I thought he was drunk. I hadn't seen the unhidden affection turning in the depths of his eyes. Silence wrapped the world, I could only hear his heartbeat. Alex opened his mouth, and without the crutch of alcohol he still couldn't bring himself to say he liked me. I was a little annoyed. The same decisiveness I showed when I confessed then, he now matched with hesitation. 3 years ago, I had taken advantage of his drunkenness and kissed him forcefully. 3 years later, I did the same. I stood and pressed my lips to his. Shock was written all over Alex's face, his body stiff and frozen. After our entanglement, our eyes met. Alex, will you still remember this in the morning? He nodded and then shook his head, looking as if he'd lost the ability to think. I smiled. We'll talk about it tomorrow morning. Go back to sleep now. Of course he didn't sleep. Instead he frantically shared his joy with my brother isn't very smart. Ah, she kissed me. What does that mean? Does she like me? My brother isn't very smart didn't reply to him, and other netizens exploded with excitement. This damn thing can catch up. So it was just a little couple's trick, huh? I actually thought it worked, ha 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 ha, I wasn't fooled. I seriously suspect the blogger is fishing for clicks, tricking his buddies, don't fool yourself. Alex fired back reply after reply. I read them with relish for a long while, then finally turned off my phone and went to sleep. The next morning, Alex arrived at the dining room with dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept well. But I had slept soundly. I ate breakfast as if nothing was wrong. He sat opposite me, extremely nervous. Seeing me calmly eat for 10 minutes without saying a word, Alex couldn't wait any longer. He ventured, last night. You drank too much last night. And then? That's it? No follow-up? The light in Alex's eyes went out with a snap. He looked a little aggrieved. Why won't you take responsibility? What? Alex completely forgot about pretending to be drunk and said with righteous certainty, you kissed me last night. So you have to be responsible for me. I let the corner of my mouth lift slightly. You remember that clearly? But you drank a lot last night. Alex looked guilty and couldn't bring himself to meet my eyes, whispering defensively, I'm different from other people. I put down the sandwich in my hand and looked at him very seriously. All right, the relationship between the two of us is indeed not simple. The light returned to Alex's eyes. He was so excited his voice trembled, then what kind of relationship are we? I paused, and finally, looking into his expectant eyes, I spoke slowly, the two of us are actually lip friends. Lip friends? A relationship that's just about kissing with no obligations. Alex felt the sky collapse, his voice was trembling. Will I be that open 3 years from now? He looked deeply hurt. I lowered my head in loneliness, if you can't accept it now, I can go find someone else. Alex blurted out, no. Although he hadn't yet come to terms with such an open side of himself, he was even less able to accept me going to someone else. He paused for a moment. So, what exactly are we two kiss friends supposed to do? I answered calmly, just kissing. Alex's mouth twitched, just kissing? Yeah, just to satisfy my curiosity. His CPU was completely fried. I might need to process this, he muttered, then vanished back into his room like a ghost. I watched his retreating figure and couldn't help smiling as I opened my phone. Sure enough, he'd rushed off again to find my buddy isn't very bright. Bro. Everything's a disaster. She says we're just lip friends. Lip friends? It's just a relationship where we only kiss. Holy crap. Obviously, my brother isn't very smart was also greatly shocked. A few seconds later, I got a message from Casper. Sister-in-law, you really are awesome, I admit defeat. He finally couldn't keep up the act. My brother isn't very smart, don't say that. After all, you've been Alex's wingman for 3 years. Casper saw that line and instantly confessed. Sister-in-law. It was indeed my idea back then. For the sake of you and Alex ending up together, please don't tell Alex that my brother isn't very smart was me. If he hadn't taught Alex those 3 tactics every time, I never would have realized that my brother isn't very smart was Casper. I also wouldn't have discovered that the bad idea from 3 years ago was Casper's too. I always thought Alex didn't seem like the sort of person who could come up with those moves. After all, when it comes to relationships, he really isn't very smart. Since Alex learned that our friendship was a lip friendship, he deliberately avoided me. But he couldn't help coming close. He seemed to be agonizing inside. On one hand, he thought our relationship was far too impure. On the other, he felt that an impure relationship was still better than a purely platonic roommate. By coincidence, the high school reunion said to bring spouses, so I decided to deliver one final blow. This time he would have to confess to me. I blocked Alex as he tried to flee, he was cornered and didn't even dare to look me in the eye. Alex, if this is bothering you, I can move out. I'm not troubled by it. Liar. His frown was so deep it could rival the Mariana Trench. Then will you come with me to the class reunion? Huh? Me? Yeah. A flash of barely noticeable delight crossed his face. So, what am I then? I smiled and blinked at him. Of course, you're my husband's. With the title of my husband in name, Alex stopped avoiding me. It felt like a disreputable relationship finally seeing the light of day. On the night of the high school reunion, he came out of his room in a made-to-measure suit. My vision went dark. I immediately told him to change. He was a little unwilling. Who knows if I'll run into your first love from school, I can't afford to lose. I was equal parts amused and helpless, and I simply took a set of clothes from his wardrobe and handed them to him. Although he wasn't pleased, he obediently changed. When he was done, I looked him over and nodded. We'll wear matching outfits so everyone will know we're a couple. Because of that line of mine, he was successfully consoled. When Alex and I arrived at the restaurant, most of the guests had already come. Ava saw me and stood up to greet me. I took Alex's hand and sat down beside her. She glanced at me, then at Alex, and teasingly said, "Your husband doesn't look the same as before, does he?" He really was different. Before he had a buzz cut, like a wolf dog. Now he had curls, like a puppy. If I didn't look closely, I'd have thought you changed husbands. Words said carelessly, meaning taken to heart. When Alex heard that, his expression dimmed in an instant, his eyes flickered. His thoughts spun 1,000 turns. He had already convinced himself that I had brought someone else before. Unwilling to accept it, he wanted to win back a point for himself. It's a different one, a different, more handsome one. Ava thought he was joking and laughed heartily, utterly unaware of how Alex's mood was sinking. He was kind of fun like this. After all, I'd never seen him get jealous of himself before. Alex strategically picked up his cup and, while taking a drink, glanced at me. It seemed he was waiting for me to explain. I pretended not to notice and carried on chatting merrily with Ava. A few minutes later he couldn't hold it in. Leaning close to my ear, he asked viciously, "Is he that kind of person with you too?" I played dumb. "Who is he?" "My senior." I couldn't help laughing out loud. Who calls a romantic rival a senior? What kind of relationship? He forced out 3 words, lip friendship. I didn't answer him, just watched him smile. He took it to mean I had agreed. The words he spoke were sourer than old vinegar. A friendship among 3 people is still too crowded. He misunderstood completely. I intended to explain. After all, he was my husband. I gestured to Alex with my finger. He hesitated a few seconds before leaning in his ear. I pressed against his ear, my breath scattering across his face. "Alex, what he and I have is pure friendship. I've only ever kissed you." After saying that, I turned my head and left a butterfly-like kiss on his cheek. Alex seemed as if someone's freeze point had been pressed. He didn't move at all. His cheeks, however, flushed visibly by the second. When he realized what I'd done, he made 100 fake moves a second, utterly unable to suppress the smile tugging at his mouth. He sat in the corner quietly pleased with himself, yet he seemed to be thinking of something else. In the end his expression grew resolute, as if he'd made up his mind. I watched him typing on his phone with confusion. He had just put it down when Casper's message popped up. "Sis-in-law, you can see for yourself." The attached image was Alex's message to "My friend isn't very bright," that is, the private message sent to Casper. "Bro, I've decided to confess. She must like me, she's just a bit reserved. She said she's only kissed one person, me. Maybe that's the only one." Seeing that sentence, I fell into a long silence. Lucky for Alex it was me he ran into. Otherwise, with his kind of self-romancing, end-stage lovesick brain, if someone sold him out he'd only say, "She only sold me," which proves she has feelings for me. Alex stayed tense until the party ended. He and I walked out of the restaurant, and the night wind made me shiver involuntarily. When Alex saw this, he took off his coat and draped it over me. The faint, familiar scent from his clothes surrounded me again after a long while. I looked at him standing before me and finally couldn't help but fling myself into his arms. I wrapped both hands around his waist, feeling his warmth. Alex didn't push me away, instinctively he hugged me back. I knew this was the physiological response that had developed between us after so many embraces. Maybe it was the moonlight at just the right angle. Maybe it was love raging beyond restraint. Alex held me and, as if effortlessly, spoke the words I wanted to hear. Ivy. Whether it's a lip friendship or a purely platonic friendship, I can't keep it up anymore. Every time I see you my heart tells me I like you. I felt the vibration of his chest. I also understood clearly that his heart was beating for me in that moment. So I said, then let's be together. Being with Alex felt rather fresh. After all, we'd been married 2 years. He had evolved into a restrained, abstinent husband. And now he had reverted to that pre-marriage, irresistibly flirtatious puppy persona. Who could help but say, I'm so lucky. Most important, although Alex had lost his memory, his cooking skills hadn't declined one bit. He was often puzzled by the dishes he made. He clearly had never learned how, yet he pulled them off effortlessly. He believed himself to be uniquely gifted and almost signed up for a chef competition. I used the excuse that I only wanted him to cook for me alone to dissuade him. From then on, he worked even harder to cook for me. Because the food was too good, my stomach couldn't take it. After a hospital checkup, the doctor told me 2 pieces of good news. First, there's nothing wrong with my stomach. Second, I'm pregnant. I took the paper and felt a little dazed. My mind was frantically calculating the timing. I finally determined it must have been the night before Alex's car accident, a little over a month ago. I accepted the news quickly. After all, it had been part of the plan between Alex and me. But I'd forgotten, this was the plan from before Alex lost his memory. At this moment, in the hospital corridor, Alex clutched the report and stood there disheveled by the wind. He looked as if he'd turned to stone. When his eyes met mine, his whole body was trembling. Whose child is this? Yours. Alex gave a bitter laugh. As far as I know, kissing doesn't cause pregnancy. He paused for a few seconds after speaking. Or did technology advance so fast in 3 years that kissing can make you pregnant now? I think I finally understand why people say a woman in love is no different from someone who's drunk 3 gin of baijiu. With Alex's brain, I can't believe I let myself be infatuated to the point of becoming an idiot, let alone get completely hooked by him. I felt like crying but had no tears. Let's go home first. I'll tell you when we get back. As soon as we got home, I pulled our marriage certificate, Alex's and mine, out of the drawer. He saw that bright red booklet and froze again. He was completely shattered. You're married? I've become the other woman? You're not the other woman. Not even the other woman? Could it be the 4th? Alex watched my expression darken and shut his eyes. It can't be the 5th, right? His voice was already starting to crack, his eyes rimmed red, like he was about to burst into tears any second. Seeing him like that, I flurried forward. Don't cry, honey. Alex turned his head stubbornly. Me being the other woman, and I'm not even allowed to cry? Don't call me your husband. You have a legitimate husband, I'm just a shameful mistress. This is too disgraceful. No, none of this made any sense. How could he have the status of the legitimate wife and the mentality of the other woman? My head ached. I forcefully opened the wedding photo and held it up in front of him. Read it to me. Alex was heartbroken. Isn't this a little too cruel for another woman? Read it. Alex recited like an emotionless machine, word by word, certificate holders Ivy, Alex, huh? 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 He took the marriage certificate from my hand as if he'd won the lottery, glanced at the photo, then at the holders. He looked deliriously happy. 2 years ago? Was I this awesome 2 years ago? He immediately adopted the manner of a rightful husband, excitedly hugging me and burying his head in the hollow of my neck. I'm so happy, today is truly a good day. Not only do I have a wife, but I also have a child. Alex cried again. But this time it was tears of joy. Since I became pregnant, Alex has wanted to stay by my side 24 hours a day. He still hadn't regained his memory. I asked the doctors. They said the bruising in his brain had mostly dissipated, and exactly when his memory would return was something we just had to wait for. Alex wasn't too bothered by it either. He felt it didn't matter, he'd like me the same either way. I thought about it and agreed. So I stopped worrying about it. Until one morning he came running excitedly from the living room back into the bedroom. In a voice full of delight he said to me, "Honey, you're pregnant." I rolled my eyes at him. I'm about to give birth. When I finished speaking, I realized something was wrong. Honey, you've regained your memory? Alex stepped forward and helped me up, nodding. I felt a pang of guilt remembering what I'd done while he was amnesiac, and without thinking I started apologizing. I'm sorry, honey. I shouldn't have lied to you when you had amnesia. Alex shook his head and said angrily, "It's not your fault. You can tell at a glance it was Casper's rotten idea. He's been screwing me over for years, and he didn't even spare me when I lost my memory." I watched him denounce Casper at length, and silently kept to myself that "my brother isn't very bright" was also about him. But I hadn't expected Alex to get smarter. He actually pretended to be an online friend to trick me. Fine that he pretended to be a stranger, but what a terrible username he picked. There was nothing I could do to save Casper. As he spoke, Alex suddenly changed tone, "But I've already taught him a lesson." "How did you punish him?" "I deprived him of the right to be my child's godfather." Seeing him look so pleased with himself, I silently took back the compliment I'd given him about being smart. After Alex recovered his memory, there was no real change. He still treated me like some kind of deity to be waited on. The marriage certificate in the living room had been rehung. I suddenly remembered what he said to me during our wedding vows, "Loving you has become the most ordinary thing." As if he had forgotten me, forgotten everything between us. Yet he still remembers loving me.